Welcome back to The Explainer. So today we're uncovering a piece of hidden, honestly almost improbable history behind one of the absolute most consequential creations in modern computing. I mean, it powers everything from your digital camera and big Hollywood visual effects, all the way to the high-frequency trading platforms on Wall Street and even the heavily optimized libraries that are driving modern AI. We're talking, of course, about C++. But specifically, we are looking at its origins, how this incredibly scrappy project, forged in the completely unique environment of Bell Labs, evolved from its predecessors to become the bedrock of our digital world.
I mean, listen to what the actual creator of the language, Bjarne Stroustrup, had to say about it. He said, "I look at C++ and I find it scary. It underlies many of the biggest systems in the world." It's wild to think about, right? The architect of this massive global language looks at what it's become with a sense of awe, and honestly, maybe a little bit of terror. To really understand how it got so unbelievably big, we have to travel back to an era where building software was an entirely different and, frankly, incredibly painful beast.
Section 1. A primitive digital world, coding in the 1970s and 80s. Let's really set the stage here by stripping away basically all the luxuries developers completely take for granted today.
Just imagine sitting down to write a massive software system back in the late 1970s. We're talking no syntax highlighting, zero code navigation, no statement completion. Actually, a lot of programmers back then were stuck using line-oriented editors. What that meant was if you made a single typo on a line of code, you couldn't just backspace. Nope, you had to retype the entire line. And if you needed high performance for something truly advanced, you were literally forced to program in raw assembly language, which meant writing entirely different code for every single different kind of computer chip. The ambition for software was growing super fast, but the tools were agonizingly primitive.
Section 2. Inside AT&T's Bell Labs, the ultimate tech incubator. And well, this brings us to the surprisingly unlikely birthplace of our solution.
Now wrap your head around this number, 1 million. Back then, AT&T was arguably the biggest company in the country. They employed nearly 1 million people scattered across 27,000 different locations. I mean, 3 out of every 4 phones in the United States were Bell phones. Because they operated basically as a giant monopoly, they had this completely guaranteed massive revenue stream. And they took a tiny slice of that colossal pie and used it to fund Bell Labs.
So it begs a pretty fascinating question. How exactly did a phone company end up building the modern software world? Well, Bell Labs' actual mandate was simply to improve telephone service. But because AT&T's scale was just so unimaginably huge, improving telephone service meant they could take a remarkably broad view of research. If someone had a really smart idea, they basically just let them run with it. It was the ultimate tech incubator. The C language, the Unix operating system, early digital camera chips, all of it was being birthed right there in the hallways of New Jersey.
Section 3. The distributed system problem. Building for a nation. Enter a young programmer who had a seriously massive problem to solve.
So here's the crucial turning point. When young Bjarne Stroustrup arrived at Bell Labs around 1979, fun fact, after initially being told there weren't even any jobs for him, he really wanted to build something spectacular. He set out to build a distributed system based on Unix, but he instantly hit a massive wall. Remember, every single person in the country picking up a phone was interacting with an AT&T program. The performance demands were literally unprecedented. He absolutely had to manipulate the hardware directly, writing memory managers and device drivers, which meant he needed a really fast, low-level language. But at the exact same time, he also needed to organize this sprawling network of communication modules, so the whole thing didn't just devolve into pure chaos.
Section 4. Marrying C and Simula. Structure meets control. Faced with this wall, Bjarne had to look at the tools he actually had available and make a pretty radical choice. And this perfectly illustrates his central dilemma. Literally right down the hallway from him, Dennis Ritchie and Brian Kernighan had created the C programming language. Now, C was incredible for system programming. It let you control the machine hardware perfectly. But as programs scaled up, C could easily turn into a total rat's nest of memory pointers. It was just really hard to organize. On the flip side, back in Europe, Bjarne had previously used a language called Simula. Simula was the original object-oriented language. It had classes, it had hierarchies, absolutely perfect for organizing massive, complex systems. The fatal flaw? Simula was way too slow, and it chewed up way too much memory for AT&T's super rigorous performance needs. Bjarne desperately needed the blistering speed of C, but he needed the structural organization of Simula.
Section 5. The birth of C++, an increment on C. The solution he found?
It wasn't some grand, highly funded corporate initiative. It was a scrappy fusion born entirely out of necessity.
Watching how this actually unfolded is just so fascinating. In 1980, Bjarne basically just took the core functionality of Simula and bolted it right onto C, creating a preprocessor that he pragmatically called C with classes. But to make it actually viable in the real world, he spent a whole year in 1983 building a proper compiler, which became known as C-Front. And here is the absolute genius of C-Front. Instead of compiling the code all the way down to machine code, which, by the way, would have required building an entirely new software ecosystem from scratch, C-Front just compiled the new language straight back into standard C code. This meant literally anyone, anywhere, could start using it without buying new infrastructure or rewriting their base libraries. It was basically a brilliant Trojan horse for innovation.
But you know what's crazy? Despite being nestled inside the absolute largest company in America, the resource constraints on this project were staggering. While AT&T had 1 million employees, the C++ project started out as exactly one person, just Bjarne. He was writing the compiler, writing the documentation, managing the entire language implementation, and, get this, acting as his own IT help desk. Even later on, when AT&T actually tried to commercialize a compiler, the whole team was still only about 14 people. AT&T management honestly didn't fully grasp what they even had on their hands, which actually meant Bjarne was mostly left in peace, quietly giving away early implementations to people for literally just the cost of the physical tape it was shipped on.
Oh, and we have to talk about the name. By 1983, C with classes was feeling a little bit dated. Bjarne asked his friends for some suggestions and ultimately landed on C++. It's actually a total geeky semantic joke. In the C programming language, the ++ operator simply means to increment or add 1 to a variable. So C++ literally translates to an increment on C. He did actually mention later that he probably should have called it ++C for strict programming accuracy, but he said he took pity on the folks who had to write alphabetical indexes for computer science textbooks.
Ultimately, what this whole explainer really shows us is that C++ did not just appear out of a vacuum, and it absolutely didn't come from some massive corporate top-down mandate. It was a completely scrappy solution built out of the sheer, unyielding necessity of dealing with massive scale using primitive tools. Bjarne Stroustrup forged it in this totally unique corporate environment, quietly blending the very best parts of C and Simula together while literally answering his own help desk tickets.
Which leaves us with this final, kind of mind-blowing thought. If a one-person team at a 1980s phone company, operating under intense constraints and mostly ignored by the executives, managed to single-handedly build the invisible foundation of our entire modern digital world, what tiny, totally underfunded invisible architectures are being shaped by scrappy developers right now? The tools of tomorrow are more than likely hiding in the quiet corners of today's tech landscape. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning and keep looking for those invisible architectures.